The air in the conference room was cold, recycled, and smelled of nothing at all. That was the point, I guess. Up here on the executive floor, they scrubbed the air clean of the smells of the plant below, the hot metal, the cutting fluid, the faint, sharp scent of ozone from the welders. For 30 years I'd worn those smells like a second skin. Up here I felt naked. Across the polished mahogany table, Preston Vance, our new vice president of operations, smiled a smile that didn't touch his eyes. He was young, maybe 35, with a sharp suit, an expensive watch, and an MBA that he clearly believed made him an expert on things he'd never once touched. He slid 2 documents across the table. One was a check. The other was a non-disclosure agreement. "Stan," he said, his voice smooth and practiced, like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. "We feel this is a very generous offer. It represents our commitment to our people, a way to help Jake move forward after this unfortunate incident." Unfortunate incident. That's what he called it. I looked at the check. $10,000. It was a pittance, an insult wrapped in corporate letterhead. It might cover the first round of co-pays for the surgeries my son Jake was going to need. It wouldn't cover the fact that he was a 24-year-old kid who loved to carve intricate birds out of wood in his spare time, and now he couldn't make a fist with his right hand. It wouldn't cover the phantom pains, the physical therapy, the part of his spirit that got crushed along with his bones. The #7 press was a monster, an old Wallace hydraulic 4-post that had been a workhorse since before I started, and like any old workhorse, it had its ailments. I had flagged the primary safety guard on that press 6 times in the last 18 months. The steel mesh was sound, but the mounting bracket was rusted through. The vibration of the press, a constant bone-jarring shudder, was slowly eating away at the bolts. I wrote it up in every weekly report. I showed the rust blooms to the previous maintenance chief, a good man named Dave who retired last year. He'd just shake his head. "Corporate cut the maintenance budget by 40%, Stan. They want us to run on duct tape and prayers." When Preston Vance's regime took over, prayers were the only thing left in the budget. Last month, Jake was feeding a sheet of 1/4-inch steel into the press. The machine cycled, a deafening crash of metal on metal, and the vibration finally did what I'd been warning them it would do. The guard shook loose, fell away from the machine just for a second. In that second, Jake's hand guiding the sheet slipped. The press came down. I didn't see it, but I heard it. You learn to distinguish the sounds of the floor, the normal rhythmic thunder of production, and the other sounds, the shriek of tearing metal, the pop of a bursting hydraulic line, and the human scream. That one cuts through everything. When I saw the crowd gathering, my blood ran cold. When I saw it was my own boy on the ground, cradling what was left of his hand, the world just went silent. Now, sitting in this sterile room, Preston Vance was telling me to take their blood money and keep my mouth shut. The NDA was ironclad. It didn't just prevent us from suing, it prevented us from talking about the incident, the press, the safety conditions, anything to anyone. It was a gag order bought for the price of a used car. For 30 years I had been the loyal shift foreman. I'd kept my mouth shut about the deferred repairs, the faulty wiring, the patched-up steam pipes that hissed like angry snakes. I did it to protect the jobs of the 150 men and women on my floor. In a town with only 2 major employers, a pink slip was a death sentence for a family. We were a crew. We looked out for each other. I would find workarounds. I'd cannibalize parts from decommissioned machines. I'd reschedule production runs to put the least demanding jobs on the most decrepit equipment. I played a constant high-stakes game of chess with disaster, and for 3 decades I'd won. The executives in their clean offices, they saw the production numbers stay high and the maintenance costs stay low, and they called it loyalty. They gave me plaques. They called me a company man. They had no idea the tightrope we were all walking on. They didn't want to know. My silence wasn't loyalty to them. It was loyalty to my people. But now, my own son was the one who fell. and their response wasn't to fix the machine. It was to silence the victim. I looked at Preston's smug face. He thought he was dealing with some old, beaten-down grease monkey who'd be grateful for the scraps. He didn't know me at all. He didn't understand the kind of loyalty that is forged in the heat and noise of a factory floor. He only understood the kind you buy. My silence had been a shield for my crew, but it had also been a blanket covering up the rot in this company, and that rot had finally poisoned my own family. My silence was over. I picked up the pen. Preston's smile widened. He thought he'd won. I signed the NDA, but I didn't sign my name. I wrote 2 words. Not enough. Then I stood up, pushed the papers back across the table, and walked out of the room without another word, the faint, sterile smell of the executive floor finally replaced by the familiar, honest scent of hot oil and hard work as I descended the stairs back to the real world. My world. The world I was about to turn upside down. The drive home was a blur. The 10 miles of cracked asphalt between the plant and my small house felt like 1,000. The unsigned NDA sat on the passenger seat, a pale ghost in the fading afternoon light. It felt heavier than a bag of tools, filled with the weight of 30 years of choices, 30 years of compromises. Each crack in the road, each familiar landmark, the old diner, the closed-down hardware store, was a testament to a life spent in one place, dedicated to one company. A company that had just tried to buy my son's future for $10,000. I pulled into my driveway and just sat there, the engine ticking as it cooled. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. For 30 years I'd been Stan the foreman, reliable Stan, the guy who could make a dying machine run for one more shift. The guy who knew which bearings were about to go just by the pitch of their whine. The guy who kept the peace, who kept the line moving, who kept the paychecks coming. I had worn that identity like a suit of armor. But sitting there, in the silence of my truck, I realized the armor was just a cage. I had been so focused on protecting the jobs of my crew that I had enabled the very danger that now threatened them all. My silence hadn't been a shield. It had been complicity. It was a debatable choice, I know. A man has to weigh the immediate good of a paycheck against the abstract risk of an accident. In a town like ours, that paycheck puts food on the table tonight. The accident might happen tomorrow, or next year, or never. So you make the trade. You swallow the risk. You tell yourself you're being practical, a pragmatist. But when it's your own son's hand in the press, pragmatism feels a lot like cowardice. I finally went inside. The house was quiet. Maria, my wife, was in the kitchen. She looked up from the sink, her hands dripping water. She didn't have to ask. She saw it on my face. She'd been seeing the cracks form in my foundation for years, ever since the new ownership, the Synergy Group, had taken over from the Rockwell family. She just dried her hands on a towel and came over, wrapping her arms around my waist. I leaned my forehead against hers, the smell of dish soap and home, a stark contrast to the sterile nothingness of that conference room. "It's okay, Stan," she whispered. "Whatever it is, we're okay." But we weren't. Later that evening, I went to the hospital. Jake was in his room, the television on, but the volume low. He had his good hand, his left, tucked behind his head, staring at the ceiling. The other arm was a mountain of white bandages resting on a pillow. He tried to smile when I came in. "Hey, Dad." We talked for a bit, about nothing really. The weather, the terrible hospital food. Then he looked at his bandaged hand. "You know the funny thing," he said, his voice quiet. "I was going to start on that whittling project this weekend. A little wren for Mom's birthday." Jake's hands were his gift. Since he was a little boy, he was always making something, model airplanes, little wooden animals, eventually intricate carvings that looked so real you expected them to take flight. It wasn't just a hobby, it was who he was. And the press had taken that. I told him about the meeting, the 10,000, the NDA. I expected him to be angry, to curse the company, but he just sighed. A weary sound from a 24-year-old kid who shouldn't have to sound so tired. "It's just the way it is, Dad," he said. "Big company, little guy. What are you gonna do?" And that was it. That was the spark. That sentence, delivered with such defeated resignation, was the thing that finally broke the dam of my restraint. No, it is not just the way it is. It's the way we've allowed it to be. It's the way I allowed it to be. I saw in my son's eyes the same weary acceptance I saw in the eyes of my crew every day. The belief that they were powerless, that the best they could hope for was to keep their heads down and not be the one the lightning strikes. I had fostered that belief with my silence. I went home that night, a different man. The company man was dead and buried. Maria was asleep. I went to the garage, a place that was my sanctuary, filled with the smell of sawdust and old oil. In the bottom drawer of my big red toolbox, beneath a pile of greasy rags, was a set of notebooks. 5 of them, spiral-bound, their covers stained and their pages curled from humidity. My black books, I called them. For 15 years I had documented everything. It started as a way to keep track of repairs for my own reference, a way to predict what would fail next. But over time, it became something else. It became a record of neglect. I opened the most recent one. My handwriting, a neat blocky script, filled the pages. September 12th, press #7, Wallace Hydraulic, SN 482B. Safety guard mount C-bolt showing severe corrosion. Vibration at 115% of spec during high-speed cycle. Flagged to maintenance. Response: no budget for non-critical repair. October 3rd, conveyor line 2. Wiring harness frayed near motor housing. Clear fire hazard, taped as temp fix. Flagged to Supervisor Vance. Response: deemed acceptable risk. November 21st, smelting furnace #3. Crack in refractory lining, upper quadrant. Temperature variance of 8%. Flagged. Response: monitor situation. Page after page, it was all there. A detailed, dated, undeniable chronicle of a disaster waiting to happen. I hadn't kept it for blackmail. I'm not that kind of man. I kept it because it was the truth, and I felt like someone had to write it down even if no one would listen. I had shown it to Dave, the old maintenance chief, and he'd just looked tired. I had tried to show it to Preston Vance in my first meeting with him, and he'd waved it away. "Stan, I appreciate your diligence," he'd said, without looking at it, but we're focused on top-down efficiency gains, not bottom-up minutia. Let's focus on the big picture. The big picture. My son's crushed hand was the big picture. I remembered old Mr. Rockwell, the man who started the plant. He wore a suit, but it always had a little grease on the cuff. He'd walk the floor once a week, knew every man's name, knew their wives, their kids. I saw him once shut down the entire assembly line because he heard a squeak in a gearbox that he didn't like. He looked at the foreman and said, "A $5 bearing is not worth a $50,000 hand. Fix it." That was a different kind of loyalty. That was a two-way street. Preston Vance and the Synergy Group had turned it into a toll road where we paid the price. My mind started working, the gears turning not with resignation, but with cold, hard clarity. A lawsuit was what they expected. A long, drawn-out battle they would win with a team of slick lawyers who would bury me and Jake in paperwork and delays. It would take years, and by the end, even if we won, it would be a hollow victory. It wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't make the plant safer for the rest of my crew. But a work stoppage, that was different. A work stoppage wasn't a request, it was a statement. It hit them in the only place they felt anything. Their bottom line. It didn't require lawyers, it required leverage. And as I sat there, the oil-stained pages of my notebook open in front of me, I realized I had more leverage than their entire legal department. I didn't just know the machines were broken, I knew how they were broken. I knew the specific regulations they were violating. I knew the cascade effect, how the failure of one small part on one line would inevitably shut down 3 others. I had the blueprint to their collapse, and I was going to use it, not to destroy the plant, but to save it from itself. I wasn't going to file a lawsuit. I was going to call a meeting, on the factory floor, and we wouldn't start a single machine until the people with the power to enforce the law were standing right there beside us. My resolve hardened from a spark of anger into a solid core of ice. Tomorrow morning, the silent man was going to find his voice. The hours before dawn are a strange time. The world is quiet, and your thoughts are loud. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a pot of coffee, the 5 notebooks spread out like a battle plan. This couldn't be a wildcat strike, an angry mob shouting on a picket line. That was emotional, and emotions fade. Preston Vance could outwait an emotional outburst. No, this had to be methodical, clinical, and completely, unassailably legal. It had to be a quiet coup, executed with the precision of a machine. My weapon wasn't anger, it was the rule book, their own rules, the ones they wrote, printed, and then systematically ignored. My foresight wasn't about predicting the future, it was about knowing the past. I knew the history of every patch, every workaround, every time a mechanic had to use a part that wasn't quite right because the correct one wasn't in stock. The company saw a factory full of machines. I saw a factory full of liabilities. They saw assets on a balance sheet. I saw ticking time bombs. My plan began to form, not as a single act of defiance, but as a series of perfectly synchronized moves. It was malicious compliance on an industrial scale. We weren't going to break the rules. We were going to follow them so perfectly, so rigidly, that the entire system would seize up. The first step was to solidify my allies. This couldn't be a one-man show. At 5 a.m., I made my first call. Gus Kowalski. Gus was the best mechanic we had, a man whose hands could understand the language of metal better than most people could understand words. I'd mentored him when he was a cocky kid, fresh out of trade school, taught him how to listen for the subtle signs of a failing bearing, how to feel for a hairline crack in a housing. His loyalty was to the work, and to me. He picked up on the second ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Stan." "Gus, it's me. I need to ask you something hypothetical." There was a pause. "I'm listening." "Hypothetically," I said, "if we were to do a full by-the-book safety inspection on every piece of equipment on the floor, how long would it take you to get a single line up and running?" I could almost hear him smiling through the phone. "By the book, with the parts we got on hand." "Stan, you couldn't get the coffee maker certified by the book." "That's what I thought. How's the spare parts inventory look these days?" "It's a joke," he spat. "Vance's new lean inventories policy. We got nothing. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul every single day, pulling parts off the old Miller line, just to keep the Wallace presses from shaking themselves to pieces. It's not just unsafe, it's stupid." "I agree," I said quietly. "Gus, I'm not asking for your help just yet. I'm just telling you to be ready. Tomorrow morning, things are going to be different." "Stan," he said, his voice dropping, serious now. "You just say the word. Me and the boys, we're tired of it. We're with you." One down. The next call was harder. I needed to control the flow of work itself. That meant Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was the logistics coordinator, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 20s who had the unenviable job of managing the flow of raw materials and finished products under Preston Vance's chaotic just-in-time system. She hated him, not for emotional reasons, but for professional ones. He had taken a system that worked and broken it with buzzwords and spreadsheets. I found her number in the old company directory I still had. I met her at a 24-hour donut shop near the plant, a place where the coffee was strong and the tables were far apart. She looked wary. "Stan, it's 6 in the morning. What's so important?" I didn't waste time. I laid it out for her, not the whole plan, but her part in it. I wasn't asking her to sabotage anything. I was asking her to do her job perfectly. "Sarah, you know as well as I do that our receiving docks are a mess. We've got pallets that aren't properly shrink-wrapped, bills of lading that don't match the manifest. We let it slide because we have to keep the line moving." She nodded, sipping her coffee. "Tell me something I don't know." "Tomorrow morning," I said, "I want you to stop letting it slide. I want you to inspect every incoming pallet. If it's not up to spec, you reject it. If the paperwork is off by a single digit, you hold the shipment. You follow the company's own receiving protocol to the letter. Can you do that? A slow smile spread across her face. She understood immediately. It wasn't sabotage. It was quality control. It was unfireable. Preston Vance has been screaming about process integrity for 6 months, she said. I think it's time we finally gave it to him. Consider it done. The final piece of the puzzle was the other shifts. I couldn't shut the plant down for a morning just to have the second shift come in and start it all back up. I needed Miguel Rivera. Miguel was the second shift foreman, a man as quiet and steady as I was. We'd worked together for 20 years. His daughter, Chloe, worked the line on his shift. He understood the stakes better than anyone. I caught him as he was leaving his house for an early fishing trip. I told him everything. The meeting with Vance, the NDA, my son. When I finished, he just looked at me, his face grim. My Chloe works next to the #4 welder, he said. The one with the faulty ventilation. She comes home every night with a headache. They won't fix it. What do you need from me, Stan? Just your word, I said, that when your shift comes in, the machines stay silent, that you stand with us. He stuck out his hand. We stand with you. With my allies in place, I went back to my kitchen table. It was time to weaponize my knowledge. I spent the next 2 hours turning the handwritten notes from my black books into a professional-looking document. I created a master checklist, dozens of pages long, organized by machine. I didn't just write faulty guard. I wrote machine, Wallace hydraulic press #7 SN 482B, inspection checklist, per OSHA 1910.217, and manufacturer's guidelines. Asterisk item 1, point of operation, guarding. Asterisk asterisk, sub item 1, safety guard. Mounting assembly. Asterisk action required, visual and non-destructive testing. NDT inspection of all mounting bolts and welds for corrosion and metal fatigue. Deficiency noted, severe visible corrosion on mounting point C, previously flagged on 9/12, 10/17, 11/28, 1/5, 2/11, 3/14. Asterisk asterisk, sub item 1, B hydraulic ram pressure stank action required. Verify pressure does not exceed 10% variance from spec. Deficiency noted. Log indicates fluctuations up to 12% during high load cycles. Requires full system diagnostic and recalibration. Asterisk item 2. Electrical systems. Asterisk asterisk, sub item 2. A control panel wiring. Action required. Inspect for frayed or damaged insulation. Deficiency noted. Exposed wiring near main contact or previously flagged on 1/20. I did this for every major piece of equipment in the plant. The furnaces, the conveyors, the welders, the lathes. It was a masterpiece of accumulated neglect, a damning indictment of their entire operational philosophy. It was the truth, codified and cross-referenced. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. They were about to find out how expensive that loss truly was. I went to an all-night copy shop and printed 20 copies of the entire document. It was nearly 100 pages long. The weight of the paper in my hands felt like justice. By the time the sun came up, I was ready. I put on my work clothes, the same steel-toed boots and worn denim shirt I'd worn for decades. But today, they felt different. They felt like a uniform. I drove to the plant, my heart steady. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the loyal, silent foreman. I was the man who knew where all the bodies were buried, and I was about to start digging. The 7 a.m. whistle shrieked, its familiar sound echoing off the high steel ceilings of the plant. It was the signal that had started my workday for 30 years. It was the sound of 1,000 gears beginning to turn, of raw materials starting their journey to becoming something new. But this morning, it was an ending. Instead of taking my place by the main control panel for the assembly line, I walked to the center of the main floor to a small open space we used for shift briefings. I stepped up onto a sturdy wooden pallet, the same kind I'd seen a million times, but now it was my stage. The low rumble of conversation died down. 150 faces turned toward me. These were people I knew. I'd hired some of them. I'd trained their sons and daughters. I saw Maria's cousin Rico by the lathes. I saw young Tim, whose father I'd worked with before he retired. I saw the fatigue in their eyes, the ingrained caution of people who work around powerful, unforgiving machinery. They were waiting for the day's assignments, the usual rundown of quotas and schedules. They weren't getting it. I didn't raise my voice. In a loud factory, the quietest man is often the one who gets heard. "Morning, everyone," I said, my voice calm and even. It carried in the relative silence. Last month my son Jake had his hand crushed by the number 7 press. A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone knew, of course, but for me to say it out loud, here on the company's time, was something new. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. Yesterday the company offered us $10,000 and a gag order to make it all go away. I paused again, letting the insult of that number sink in. For 30 years I've worked this floor with you. I've always believed my first job was to keep you safe and keep you employed. I see now I have been failing at the first part because I was too focused on the second. The company calls our willingness to work with faulty equipment loyalty. They see it as a way to save money. Today that changes. Today, our loyalty is to each other, to our own safety, to our own hands and lives. I bent down and picked up a thick 100-page document from the pallet. I held it up. For 15 years I've kept a record of every deferred repair, every ignored safety warning, every corner they've made us cut. I looked over at Gus, who was standing near the front of the crowd. He gave me a sharp, determined nod. This isn't a list of complaints, it's a checklist. It's based on their own safety policies and federal regulations. Gus and Miguel, who had come in early, moved through the crowd with stacks of the copied checklists. They handed one to every machine operator, every mechanic, every crew chief. "Here's the plan," I said, my voice ringing with a new authority. "It's simple. We are conducting a full by-the-book, top-to-bottom safety inspection of this entire facility. Right now, we will not start a single motor, engage a single gear, or heat a single furnace until every item on these lists has been checked, verified, and signed off on. This is not a strike. This is a safety stand-down. We're finally going to do our jobs the way the rulebook says they're supposed to be done." A new kind of silence fell over the floor. Not the quiet of waiting, but the quiet of understanding. It was a brilliant move, and they all knew it. They couldn't be fired for following safety protocols. They couldn't be disciplined for refusing to operate a machine that was officially documented as unsafe. I had given them a shield. The low hum of the ventilation fans was the only sound. Then, one by one, the machine operators looked at their checklists, then at their machines, and then they just stood there, arms crossed. The plant, a living, breathing creature of steel and power, was inert. It was a silent takeover, and it was beautiful. It took about 15 minutes for the shockwave to reach the front office. Preston Vance came storming through the double doors that separated the carpeted offices from the concrete factory floor. He was wearing his crisp suit and polished shoes, which looked absurdly out of place. His face was a mask of indignant rage. He marched right up to me, 2 terrified-looking junior managers trailing in his wake like pilot fish on a shark. "Miller, what is the meaning of this? Why aren't the lines running?" he demanded, his voice tight. I didn't get down from my pallet. I looked down at him. "We're conducting a safety review, Mr. Vance," I said calmly. I picked up another copy of the checklist and held it out to him. "As you can see, there are a number of Priority 1 deficiencies that need to be addressed before we can safely begin operations. For example, the number 7 press." He smacked the document out of my hand. The pages fluttered to the grimy floor. "I don't care about your paperwork. I care about our production schedule. We have a shipment for North American Steel that has to go out by noon. Get these people back to work now." "I can't do that, sir," I said, my tone still maddeningly reasonable. It would be a violation of company policy, and more importantly, a violation of federal law. As shift foreman, I have a responsibility to ensure a safe working environment. I'm sure you, as vice president of operations, understand that. I was using his own corporate language against him, and it was driving him insane. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You're fired, Miller. Get your things and get off this property." I just smiled a little. I looked past him, at the 150 silent workers standing firm behind me. "You can fire me, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice carrying across the floor. "But these checklists are still here, and these good people still have to follow them. Are you going to fire all of them too? Who's going to run your machines then?" He spun around, his eyes wild, and finally seemed to grasp the situation. He wasn't facing one disgruntled employee, he was facing his entire workforce, united and immovable. He sputtered, speechless for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and started furiously stabbing at the screen, no doubt calling his bosses or his lawyers. The cascade was already beginning. As Vance was making his panicked call, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah in logistics. "First shipment from Acme Steel just arrived. Pallets are a mess. Rejected. They're furious. Have a great day." A few minutes later, Gus walked over to Vance, holding up a cracked motor housing. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice loud and clear, "found this on the main conveyor. We're going to need to order a new one. Looks like it'll take 6 to 8 weeks, according to the supplier." Preston Vance's face went from red to a pasty, sickly white. He was standing in the middle of his kingdom, surrounded by his silent, powerful machines, and he had absolutely no control. He had mistaken our silence for submission. He had mistaken my loyalty for weakness. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson. A lesson I like to call arrogance in a clean shirt will always be beaten by competence in steel-toed boots. The silent takeover was complete. Now the power shift would begin. The first crack in their dam appeared exactly 2 hours into the stoppage. Gus Kowalski, my best mechanic, wiped his hands on a rag, walked over to where Preston Vance was now pacing like a caged animal, and handed him a neatly folded piece of paper. It was his letter of resignation. "I can't in good conscience continue to work here, Mr. Vance," Gus said, his voice ringing with professionalism. "The state of this equipment is beyond repair with the resources allocated. I'm a mechanic, not a miracle worker. My last day will be in 2 weeks, as per my contract." Vance just stared at him, dumbfounded. Before he could respond, 2 of Gus's most skilled apprentices, young guys in their 20s, who could diagnose a hydraulic system by ear, walked up and did the same. "We go where Gus goes," one of them said simply. The talent exodus had begun. These weren't just bodies on a payroll, they were the institutional knowledge of the plant's mechanical nervous system. They could get jobs anywhere in the state before lunch, and Vance knew it. That was the thing about true competence. It's always in demand. Panicked, Vance changed tactics. He ordered me into the conference room again, the same cold, sterile box where he'd tried to buy my silence. This time, a grim-faced man I recognized as the regional director, a man named Peters, was on the large television screen via video call. The mood had shifted from condescending authority to barely concealed desperation. "They tried the stick first. Stanley," Peters began, his voice tinny through the speakers, "you are aware that you are leading an illegal work stoppage, which is a breach of your employment contract. We have every right to pursue legal action against you and every single employee on that floor." I leaned back in my chair. "With all due respect, Mr. Peters, this is not an illegal work stoppage. It is a safety stand-down, initiated by me in my capacity as shift foreman, in response to multiple, documented, and unaddressed safety violations, as per Section 8, Paragraph 4 of our own corporate safety manual. I have the documentation right here." I patted the thick binder I'd brought with me. I imagine the Department of Labor would be very interested to see it. Their eyes flickered towards the binder. The threat of lawyers evaporated, so they switched to the carrot. It was a big carrot. "Look, Stan," Vance said, trying for a conciliatory tone that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "We understand your frustrations. Clearly, there have been some communication breakdowns. We value you. You're a company man. So we've decided to create a new position, Director of Plant Safety. It's yours. A 30% raise, a new office, full authority over the maintenance budget. We'll also take care of all of Jake's medical expenses, no questions asked. A separate settlement, on top of that, a significant one. All we need is for you to go out there and get your people back to work." A few days ago, that offer might have tempted me. An office, authority, the resources to finally fix things, but I looked at their desperate faces and I saw the truth. It wasn't a genuine offer, it was a bribe. They weren't trying to fix the plant, they were trying to fix me. The moment the lines were running, that full authority would be strangled by red tape and my office would become a powerless prison. They didn't want a director of plant safety, they wanted a scapegoat with a fancy title. I stood up. "My price isn't a promotion, and it's not money," I said, looking from Vance to the face on the screen. "My price is simple. First, you tear up my son's NDA. Second, you get a certified team from the national safety regulators, not the local guys you play golf with, the national ones on a plane, and you get them down here to walk this floor with me in my book. When they say this plant is safe, the machines will run, not before." Peter's face on the screen went rigid. "That's out of the question. The delays, the fines, then I guess we have nothing more to talk about," I said and walked towards the door. My hand was on the knob when my personal cell phone, not my company one, began to ring. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Stan Miller speaking." "Mr. Miller, my name is Arthur Corrigan. I'm the CEO of Corrigan Manufacturing over in Shelbyville. I hope I'm not disturbing you." His voice was calm, old school, the voice of a man who built his company with his own hands. "I'm a little busy right now, Mr. Corrigan." "I'm sure you are," he said, and I could hear a smile in his voice. "The manufacturing world is a small one. Word gets around when an entire plant grinds to a halt over safety concerns. That takes guts. It also takes a hell of a leader." I was silent, unsure where this was going. "I'm opening a new facility at the end of the year," Corrigan continued. "State of the art. Best equipment money can buy. My problem is, the best equipment is useless without the best people. I need a plant manager. Someone who puts his people and their safety first, because he knows that's how you get quality and productivity. I think that someone is you, and when this whole mess is over, I'll hire every single qualified man and woman you recommend to come with you. No questions asked." I stood there in the doorway of that cold conference room, with Vance and Peters watching me, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. Arthur Corrigan had just handed me a lifeboat. Not just for me, but for my entire crew. The power had not just shifted, it had tilted so far in my favor that the old management was about to slide right off the map. I looked back at Vance. "You might want to get on the phone to the regulators," I said. "It seems my schedule is about to get very busy." The end came faster than I expected. Desperation makes a company bleed money, and we had opened a carotid artery. The shutdown stretched into its third day. The call from their biggest client, North American Steel, was apparently a short one. Their CEO didn't yell, he just calmly stated that they were invoking the non-performance clause in their contract and moving their $10 million annual business to a more reliable supplier. The news hit the internal email chains within an hour, and Sarah, my ally in logistics, forwarded it to my personal account with a simple subject line: "Checkmate." That was the kill shot. The next morning, 2 black sedans with government plates pulled into the factory parking lot. A team of 4 inspectors from the National Office of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration stepped out. They were all business, their faces grim, carrying thick binders and testing equipment. They weren't the local guys who could be swayed by a steak dinner. These were the ones they sent when things got serious. Preston Vance met them at the door, his face a pathetic mask of corporate welcome, but they barely acknowledged him. Their lead inspector, a stern woman named Clark, walked straight up to me. "You must be Mr. Miller," she said. "We were told you have some documentation for us." I handed her my black book, not a copy, the original, oil-stained and dog-eared. She took it with a gravity that told me she understood its significance. For the next 6 hours we walked the floor, me, Clark, her team, and my book. Gus joined us, pointing out the temporary patches and the cannibalized parts. It wasn't a witch hunt, it was a quiet, factual autopsy of a dying plant. With every page I turned in my notebook, every corresponding piece of rusted metal or frayed wire we examined, the faces of the inspectors grew more somber. Clark didn't say much, but she took copious notes. Vance and his managers were forced to trail behind us, silent and impotent, watching as 30 years of their willful neglect was laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights. When it was over, Inspector Clark handed me back my notebook. "Thank you for your diligence, Mr. Miller," she said. "In 30 years of doing this, I've rarely seen a more comprehensive and frankly disturbing record of systemic failure." She then turned to a pale-looking Preston Vance. "Mr. Vance, as of this moment, your facility is being issued a stop work order. We have identified over 200 individual violations, 73 of which are classified as serious and willful. This plant will not reopen until every single one is rectified to our satisfaction. You'll be receiving our full report and the accompanying fines within the week. I'd advise you to have your legal team ready." They didn't even look back as they left. The official shutdown was just a formality. The plant was already dead. The news of Preston Vance's termination came 2 days later in a cold corporate-speak email announcing a leadership transition. The regional director, Peters, was also pursuing other opportunities. The Synergy Group, facing massive fines, the loss of its biggest contract, and a PR nightmare, sold the company for scrap a month later. The name on the sign out front, the name I had worked under for my entire adult life, was gone. 6 months later, I walked through a different set of doors. The air inside didn't smell of old oil and rust, it smelled of fresh paint and new machinery. The floors gleamed. The light was bright. This was the new Corrigan manufacturing facility. My facility. I was the plant manager. A plaque by the door listed the senior staff. My name was at the top. Below it was Gus Kowalski, head of maintenance, and Miguel Rivera, head of operations. I walked the floor and the sounds were different too. The machines hummed with a quiet power, perfectly tuned and maintained. The safety guards were not afterthoughts, but integrated, polished components of the design. My old crew was here. Over 80 of them had taken Arthur Corrigan up on his offer. They had better pay, better benefits, and for the first time in a long time they worked without fear. Their faces looked different. The lines of tension and worry were gone, replaced with the quiet confidence of professionals who were respected and valued. My office overlooked the entire floor. It was a nice office, but I rarely used it. I preferred to be on the floor, with my people. My son, Jake, was in the office next to mine. His official title was Logistics Coordinator, a job he was excelling at. His hand was mostly healed. The surgeries had been successful, and the physical therapy was working. He'd never be a master wood carver again, but he'd found a new passion. On his desk was a sleek new computer and a drawing tablet. He was taking night classes in graphic design and digital art, paid for by the company. He was creating again. That was all that mattered. He came into my office, holding up a tablet to show me a new logo he'd designed for one of our product lines. It was brilliant. He smiled, a real easy smile. "What do you think, Dad?" I looked from the logo to my son's face, to the thriving, safe factory floor below. "I think it's perfect, son," I said. "Absolutely perfect." It was a new reality, one built not on silence, but on a foundation of respect. A reality we had earned. For 30 years I stood on a factory floor and thought that loyalty meant keeping my mouth shut and my head down. I thought I was protecting my people by absorbing the risks that the men in clean offices created. I was wrong. You don't protect your family by letting them live in a house with a faulty foundation. You don't protect your crew by letting them work in the shadow of a loaded gun. Real loyalty isn't silence. It's having the courage to speak the truth, especially when it's hard. It's understanding that protecting people sometimes means you have to fight the very system that signs your paycheck. The executives, the Preston Vances of the world, they think loyalty is something they can buy, something they are owed. They're wrong. Loyalty has to be earned. It's a two-way street, and the moment it becomes a one-way road, it's not loyalty anymore, it's servitude. I nearly lost my son before I understood that. The arrogance of a man in a suit who has never gotten his hands dirty is no match for the collective will of the people who actually do the work. They can have their spreadsheets and their buzzwords. We have the knowledge, the skill, and the grit. Never forget that. Your competence has value. Your experience matters. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like a disposable part in their machine. Because when the truly competent people decide to stand together, they can bring any machine and any company to a grinding halt. Competence isn't cheap, but as my old company found out, it's a hell of a lot cheaper than losing it. That's my story. Was I right to stay silent for so long, or should I have blown the whistle years earlier? It's a question I still ask myself. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you've ever felt undervalued or seen safety ignored for profit, share your story. We all need to know we're not fighting these battles alone. And if you want to hear more stories about the little guy finally getting the win they deserve, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Thank you for listening.